hang on a minute, this, not only were we wrong to be euthanizing all these birds anyway, but I was so wrong all those years to believe the narrative that pigeons are pests. And what even is a pest, So it was that. And then it's just gone from strength to strength since then. Yeah, they're incredible birds. Incredible birds. And like all animals are deserving of our compassion and our care, and especially pigeons. And I think part of the reason why I love them so much is they're bullied, and I hate bullies.
Welcome to the Better Life for Animals podcast, where we amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. Through powerful stories and expert insights, we shine a light on the efforts to rescue, protect, and advocate for animals. Be sure to subscribe wherever you're watching or listening. Every follower helps us reach more people. And support animal sanctuaries. Enjoy the conversation.
Today's guest is someone truly special. Susan Joyce, lovingly known in her community as the Pigeon Lady. For years, Sue has been rescuing, rehabilitating, and advocating for pigeons, birds that most people overlook, misunderstand, and even consider a nuisance. Through hands-on care, public education, and a whole lot of heart, she's showing us that every pigeon is an individual with a story worth telling. In this episode, we're going to dive into how she fell in love with pigeons, what their lives are really like, and what they can teach us about compassion. Sue, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Cheryl. It's lovely to be here. Thank you.
If I were going to say, if someone said, what is your favorite song, Cheryl? It is Feed the Birds from Mary Poppins.
Oh.
I love the misunderstood birds. They're just, there's so much that you have to tell us. I can't wait. Can you take us back to the moment when you first fell in love with pigeons or rescued one? And what was that like?
Yeah, the moment I first fell in love with pigeons. So I'll condense it. I worked in veterinary practice for a long time and didn't have anything to do with birds until my son was a certain age, and we used to walk dogs and look at birds while we were out walking the dogs, but never looked at pigeons. We were in woodland and we didn't see the odd wood pigeon, but you'd never see any other type of pigeon. And went to work every day and never thought anything about it. And I used to work at the back of a practice, a big hospital in the theatres. And unfortunately, I had an accident while I was out walking the dog one day, and I slipped and I broke my back. And that meant that after recovering, I was working at the front of the hospital. So I had a clinic at the front because I couldn't stand in theatres all day anymore. And that was the first time that I really saw birds being brought into the veterinary practice. And they would come in, they would be given to the receptionist, they would be taken through to the back, and they would be put to sleep. They'd be euthanized. And that was it. And that absolutely still happens today, and we can go into that later. It's very, very sad. But I remember thinking, what's going on? This is ridiculous. What was wrong with that animal? Why was she put to sleep? Why was she euthanized? For nobody even looked at her. So that got me into looking after birds. I basically went to the boss and said, something's wrong here. There's a disconnect. We all advocate for animals. We're veterinary professionals. What's going wrong? Can I have a kennel? Can I have some space to look after these birds? And he was a lovely man, and he said yes. So that's how it started. And 8 years in of having basically by 8 years in, I'd got a bird sanctuary. I was still working in practice. 8 years in, I still hadn't cared for a pigeon, because the pigeons would come in and somebody else at that practice used to look after them. And I'd think, that's great, because I don't really want to look after the pigeons. And then she left the practice, and I still remember that day as clear as anything. So that was about 15 years ago. And I remember thinking, oh no, I'm going to have to look after these birds. I don't know anything about them. What am I going to do? Like, what am I going to do? And I started looking after them. And the next day I woke up with these birds in my care thinking, I'm completely out my depth. I have no idea what's going on here, but I've got to do something. And I started looking after them. And I think by that evening, I'd completely fallen in love with them, because they are so different. And that narrative that we've all been told, I don't know about in the States, but in the UK, we are brought up to think they're dirty, they're smelly, they carry disease, they're a pest. And that coincided with my vegan journey about 15 years ago when I became vegan. It was about the same time that I started getting compassion for all animals. I've always been vegetarian, but not vegan, because I thought we were doing enough. And it was about the same time as that. And that was when I thought, hang on a minute, this, not only were we wrong to be euthanizing all these birds anyway, but I was so wrong all those years to believe the narrative that pigeons are pests. And what even is a pest? So it was that. And then it's just gone from strength to strength since then. Yeah, they're incredible birds, incredible birds. And like all animals are deserving of our compassion and our care, and especially pigeons. And I think part of the reason why I love them so much is they're bullied, and I hate bullies.
When you hear about the way people talk about pigeons, such as I've heard flying rats, which, by the way, I like rats too, what are some of the biggest myths and misconceptions that you wish you could erase?
The massive one, actually, when we're talking about feral pigeons, is that they're not native. They shouldn't be here. So people see them as pests. Oh, they're everywhere and they're breeding really well, and we don't need to worry about them. And one of the big things that I go out to tell people is they shouldn't be here. We bred them. So we brought these birds to life for food, for eggs, for meat, before we decided that chickens were a better thing to abuse. Thousands of years ago, we bred them from a wild bird called a rock dove. So they shouldn't actually even be here. And there's no natural food for them on our streets. They're granivores, they're pure granivores. Unlike their descendants, the rock dove, who can eat insects and berries and different things, feral pigeons, all they'll eat is grain. So the big misconception is they're here because they're scuttling around and eating our food. Well, actually, they've got no other choice. We brought them here, we domesticated them and abandoned them when we didn't want them anymore. So that's the first thing I'd like to get out. And then obviously we've kind of touched on it already, the fact that people do see them as pests, as disease carrying. They don't carry, in fact, they carry less disease than a domestic cat. So if you think about a cat, she's going to carry tapeworm, Campylobacter, leptospirosis, salmonella. Cats can carry all sorts of diseases, and they go out and they bring back sort of dead animals into our home. And yet we let those cats sit on our pillows at night. Some people do, and lick our faces, and we have close contact with a cat. Well, we're more likely, really, to catch a disease from a cat than from a pigeon. And yet pigeons are vilified. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
What are some of the most surprising and endearing behaviors that you see when you spend time with pigeons?
So I think the thing that surprises most people is how good they are at parenting their young. They're incredible parents. And again, a narrative that we've been told is pigeons are terrible parents. Their nests are just one or two sticks. They don't even bother building nests, and they don't sit on the babies the whole time. They're not flying backwards and forwards to get food. And that's because they're really efficient at being a parent. So pigeons have a crop. They have almost like a bucket within their esophagus is the best way to look at it, which is an incredible organ. It's got its own microbiome for digestion. And the reason that they have that, well, there's two reasons. So they have that so they can go out, find some food, swallow it all down in case they have to fly away without the digestion starting, so they don't get a tummy ache. So that's the reason they do it. But the other reason they do it is so that food, as it starts to digest, when they have babies, when they have young, they can regurgitate that food into the baby's mouths as a form of milk. And they've actually got special cells in that crop to produce a progesterone-based milk, the same as human mammals. That's incredible. There's only there's pigeons, and there's a type of flamingo that does that. Other than that, in the bird world, there are no other birds that produce milk in that way. They're incredible. So because that food that they're giving their young is so nutritious, they only need to feed 2 or 3 times a day. So that's why they get this bad rap for being bad parents. Because if you think of, say, a blackbird or a blue tit or a crow, they'll come backwards and forwards, in and out the nest with food all day to feed their chicks. Pigeons don't need to do that. They're really good parents. They just feed great big bolus of food a couple of times a day. And the thing with the nesting is the reason they don't build very good nests is because their ancestors lived on rocks. So all they need to do in kind of like little crevices, so they're away from all the wind, they're away from the rain. All they needed to do was put a couple of sticks at the front to stop the egg rolling forward, and that's it. But because we view animals, all animals, don't we, by how we would treat the comfort levels that we would want, we think, well, I wouldn't put my baby on a hard concrete ledge, so pigeons must be terrible parents. And actually, that's not the case at all. It's the opposite of that. They're being the best parents they can be. They're just very, very efficient at it.
And they like to be among people, it seems, because we see them everywhere.
Yeah, so again, that's because we domesticate them. So a wild pigeon. So in the UK, we have five different types of pigeons. We have wood pigeons, collared doves, turtle doves that come over from Europe, and stock doves. That those four are all very wild. They do not want to be around people. They're very scared of people, and rightly so. Feral pigeons are around people for two reasons. One is they're domestic animals, so they don't have that fear in the same way that a wood pigeon would do. And the second reason is people are the only way they can get food. There is no natural food for a pigeon at all in the countryside. So you might find in the UK, you might find pigeons hanging, say, a dairy farm because there's grain at a dairy farm. But a feral pigeon is very unlikely to go into a field of brassica, sort of like your cabbages and eat that. They're just not going to do it. A wood pigeon will, a native bird will, but a feral pigeon won't because we've domesticated that out of them. So it's looking at a feral pigeon is similar to looking at a domestic dog. So you wouldn't think it was unusual for a wolf or a fox to be scared of people. Rightly so, they should be scared of people. They should be out in the countryside. But a Labrador, you would expect to live with people. And if dogs were running around, and I know they do in some countries, but in the UK, if dogs were running around on our streets here, we'd think that was unusual and we'd want to feed them because the only really food for a domestic dog is in our homes. So it's exactly the same with feral pigeons. So yeah, that's why they're around people. And for the other reason that our towns and the buildings in our towns mimic their ancestral home. So they're looking for
Mm.
crevices in rocks. They can't do that because there are no rocks in the middle of Manchester or Birmingham or London. So they're looking at these high buildings, they're looking at the ledges, and that's where they want to nest. So yeah, that's why they're around us because they have to be.
So, for somebody who lives in an urban setting and there's pigeons all around and they want to do the right thing, and their neighbors are telling them those are a nuisance, don't feed them, what would you say? Is there a way we can
This
make
is a
this work
real,
for everyone?
yeah, it's a really, really difficult one. And I can see it from both sides. The more we feed them, in theory, the bigger the flocks are going to become. So you would think that the more you feed a pigeon, and the more food is available, the more babies they'll have. Now, with a wild pigeon, that's the case. But with a feral pigeon, again, because they're domestic, we've basically bred their contraceptive knowledge out of them. So if you think about a garden bird, we have blue tits over here, they're little birds. They'll have five eggs in a clutch, five or six eggs in a clutch. If the weather gets very cold or there's not enough insects and not enough food, they will step off those eggs. They'll let them go cold, they won't incubate them. And they'll only step back on those eggs and incubate them when the situation is right. So when there's abundant food and the weather's warm enough to hatch chicks.
Mm.
Domestic pigeons don't have that ability. So they will have, because we've bred them to create eggs a lot for us to eat, for consuming, they will just do that all year round, whether there's food source or not. So what they will do basically is they will raise their chicks even if there isn't quite enough food to feed them, and they'll just have sickly chicks. And that causes a problem then because then you get predation from rats, you get predation from other birds, like crows and magpies, but the breeding continues. So the conversation around whether we should feed or not is really, really difficult. I actually think that if you're feeding a small amount of food each day, that food, if you put down 5 kilos of food, and we're talking about pigeon corn here, if you were to put down a 5 kilo bag of pigeon corn and you've got a flock of about 20 to 30 pigeons, that food is all going to be eaten in less than 5 minutes. That is as simple as that. If you're putting down 20 kilos of pigeon food to a flock of that size, you're going to encourage rats, you're going to encourage other birds to come in, and you're going to, the food's got the potential to go a bit moldy, and then you've got health issues, associated with that. But if you're just putting up down a small amount of food, and you're changing the time you feed each day, those are sort of ways that you can hopefully keep your neighbours a bit happier, and also keep the local flock fed. And I think we have to also look at the human aspect of this when we're thinking about whether we should or shouldn't feed feral pigeons. There are a huge, thousands and thousands, a huge amount of people that meant from a mental health perspective really benefit from feeding pigeons because in some urban settings, that's the only bird you're going to see. We've moved because pigeons aren't a tree bird, because feral pigeons aren't a tree bird, they're a rock bird. They don't need trees. So if you have a block of flats, a big block of apartments, and there isn't much green space, other birds aren't going to be there because they need trees. They need to nest. They need sticks for their nests, all that kind of thing. Pigeons don't need any of that. So you will still see pigeons, even if you've got a huge block of flats with no green space at all. That's the only connection some people have to non-human animals. It's really important that we keep that connection. If we lose that, we lose so much. So yeah, I think there has to be conversation, particularly when you're talking about areas of high density people. If you've got an awful lot of people there, it might not be appropriate for there to be pigeons nesting on a balcony, let's say, that's shared with several people, and there's going to be poop and that sort of thing. But if you can talk to your neighbours and explain why, and maybe let them understand the beauty of the bird and the behavior of those birds, they'll fall in love with them as well. That's what we hope.
Absolutely. Sometimes I find that if I try to feed them, they crowd out all the other birds, and it seems like the hummingbirds go away during that time. So I have to kind of to do it in shifts, like let the hummingbirds have their space and then back to the other birds. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, first of all, it's amazing that you have hummingbirds. I've never seen one. That's incredible.
Oh,
They look
yeah,
like
I have quite a
amazing
few.
birds. Incredible. That's incredible. Yeah, they can crowd out the other birds a little bit. Yeah. So I would say really the best thing to do with that is maybe try and feed them somewhere different,
Okay.
because they have a very different food to most of the other birds anyway. So what some people will do if they've got a garden where they're feeding the other types of garden birds with a more what would be the word? Sort of a non-specific bird seed. With the pigeons, if you're feeding them pigeon corn, the other birds won't eat it because it'll be too big for them anyway. So you can just put a little pocket of that down. The pigeons will come down and eat the pigeon corn. You can feed peas, you can feed sweet corn, things that the other garden birds won't be interested in. The pigeons can come and eat that and leave the rest of the food for the other garden birds. That would be my suggestion on that. Because yeah, they can be a little bit sort of like, oh, get out of the way, and they and they're quite big birds, and they're not scared of other birds at all generally. So yeah, yeah, you could do it in a
No.
separate place.
Well, what does a typical day look like for you as the pigeon lady? What is it from the moment you get up to the time you go to bed? How are you spending your time?
Probably not how you would imagine these days. And that's because my life's changed hugely in the last couple of years. So I know we mentioned before I had a pigeon sanctuary and I had that for about 15 years. So then it would be up. Now, the great thing about pigeons is I didn't have to get up early because pigeons don't like to get up early. They're quite late risers. So I didn't used to have to get up till about 7:30, and I'd trundle down and clean them and feed them. It would be a couple of hours each morning doing that. At one point, I had a flock of about 400 birds. So it was a lot.
Whoa.
Um, yeah, it was a lot to do, but I had some volunteers. It wasn't just me. I had some amazing volunteers. But back then, I guess the rest of the day then would be spent answering phone calls, answering messages, receiving injured birds and orphan birds, and integrating them into the flock, trips to the vet, that kind of thing. But now, my day, I still don't get up to 7:30 because I've got used to that. But my day literally now is spent in front of a computer most of the time because I don't have the sanctuary anymore. My sanctuary closed a year and a half ago, and all the birds moved to other sanctuaries, and my association pays for those birds still. So they're still being looked after very, very, very well. But now it's all about advocacy. And that was because I just became known for speaking out about pigeons when although there are thousands of people in this country and in the States and all over the world that are looking out for pigeons, there weren't many people that were going on social media, or being interviewed or going on telly and that sort of thing and actually talking about it. And I've become a bit of a voice for doing that. So it just became apparent that that's what we needed. And also, I kind of recognized that all these rehabilitators looking after pigeons needed help. So the journey that I was in for the last few years of my sanctuary was one of absolute poverty. And that is personal poverty. And we're only just clawing our way out of that now because looking after pigeons is really expensive. And when you end up looking after them, because not many people do, you'll get like a pocket of people in a town that will look after them. there are loads of people that will look after all the other garden birds and the hedgehogs and the foxes and, you know, and very, rightly so, they need to be really well looked after. But with pigeons, because they're so specialized and because people don't think they want to do it, like I did back in the day when I was looking after all the pretty little garden birds, I didn't want to look after the pigeons. It's the same. All those people looking after pigeons, they don't get the funding. Um, People won't sponsor them. They're working full-time jobs and still having to go home and look after the pigeons. So I guess for me, it because I'd been in that situation, I lost my home. I became home completely homeless. I lived in a tent for a couple of weeks in Wales because didn't have any choice. Then I ended up getting hold of a caravan, lived in a caravan while I was still looking after these birds because all the money gets diverted to looking after the birds in your care. And actually, it's not appropriate. And looking back now, the birds I had in my care, they were well looked after. They really were. But I actually think there were had I had more funding, they would have been looked after better. I could have done a lot more. And you do reach a point where you think, actually, this isn't appropriate for these animals. I don't think any longer because I can't look after myself financially. I can't look after these birds financially either. So it was very much that decision as well. And I think it's really important that we, as rehabilitators and sanctuary owners of any species, we really look at that. There are a lot of sanctuaries in this country, farmed animal sanctuaries, and wild animal sanctuary that just don't get the funding, and the people are just that are doing that job are not able to look after themselves. And I think we do need to have real, honest conversations about what do we do in that situation, and when is it appropriate to move those animals on to a better situation. So it was definitely partly that as well, but it was that vision of I need to do more. And there are 400 birds in my care, but I've got a big mouth and I'm confident and happy to go out there and use it. Actually, if I go out and do this kind of advocacy and leave the hands-on care to other people, I can help thousands of birds instead. And that's what's happening. So now my day is about fundraising. I've got a team of 17 people that volunteer and work for me now, which is incredible. And we are just trying to advocate for them on a national level. We've also got involved with Palomacy, which is a huge American pigeon association. So we work with you guys out there as well, and just going out into the vegan and non-vegan community and educating people about birds. Giving the same kind of talk that I'm talking to you about today, just to people that don't really understand why pigeons need our love and our care. Doing that educational work so that eventually it will all come back. We can change everybody's hearts about pigeons, and that means they'll get better funded and better care, basically. So my day is very, very different now than it was a few years ago.
You're listening to Better Life for Animals podcast. Our mission is to amplify the voices of animal advocates, sanctuaries, and changemakers working toward a kinder, more compassionate world. But we can't do it alone. We need your help. First of all, go ahead and subscribe to this channel wherever you're watching or listening. And then get involved by visiting betterlifeforanimals.com. That's betterlifeforanimals.com. Be sure to check out our blog, learn more about incredible sanctuaries, and explore our book section, where 100% of net proceeds from book sales are donated to sanctuaries. Every action you take helps to make a difference. And remember, subscribe to this channel. And now, back to the show.
If you're just joining us, we're speaking with Susan Joyce of Pigeon Advocacy, and I am Cheryl Moss of Better Life for Animals. Susan, I love what you're talking about here because that's something we focus on here at Better Life for Animals, working with sanctuaries, recognizing that compassion can start things, but in the end, it's a business. And you have to think those things through, and you have to have a plan, and you have to be able to take care of yourself in order to be of help to anyone. And I also love I feel the same way. It's like, I don't have a sanctuary, but I still want to do something. And what can I do? I can have a podcast. You have a voice, whatever we have. So that's always another important message, which is that you may not think you have it in you to run a sanctuary proper, but there are all these other areas where you can be supportive, and not just with your money, but also with putting people together and best practices and, working together in collaboration. So that was really well put. I'm really glad to hear that you're doing well and that you have found your lane, which is good for you and then also good for the pigeons.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's super important.
I'm just curious what you think about this because years ago, decades ago, I went to Italy with my daughter, who was in high school at the time, and we were in Venice, which was very pigeon heavy. And they talked about having just introduced, maybe it was just at the time, contraceptives so that the pigeons weren't overpopulating. What are your thoughts on that? Is that still happening? What do you think?
Yeah, it's an interesting topic actually. So in the UK, contraceptions for birds is illegal.
Oh,
We're not allowed to use them here, and that's because of the population of birds of prey here. So
oh,
there's a thought that if we use contraceptives for pigeons, and the birds of prey predate them, then that contraception can pass up the food chain basically.
I see.
And we've had a lot of problems in this country with farmers shooting birds of prey. We've had a lot of problems with some of our birds of prey becoming basically extinct. There's a bird of prey here called a buzzard, and they think now that about 50 that they're doing okay now, but they were almost poisoned to extinction by farmers, unfortunately,
Mm.
back in the sort of 70s and 80s. And actually now most of the buzzards over here are French because we had to import them to get them back. So we lost most of our British buzzards. So yeah, there's a real concern about birds of prey, and there's lots of programs around that. So that's part of the reason why we've not used contraceptives out here. But we actually have a plan to try and reduce the numbers of pigeons in our towns, and that's what the National Pigeon Advocacy Association's one of the big projects that we're working on at the moment. So the way they control pigeon numbers here at the moment is ineffective and it's really sad. And they've been doing it for over 30 years and it's not working, and that is by shooting them. So what will happen is that a council will pay, yeah, pest control to come in, shoot all the adult birds, and they'll bring in a hawk to kill or scare away the adult birds. It's really sad. Obviously, what actually happens is the chap arrives in the morning with the hawk. All the adult birds fly away. He leaves at 6 o'clock in the evening, and the adult birds come back. But he gets paid for that. And because it's ineffective, that he can continue to get paid, and that's what we're learning about pest control now. Or they'll shoot the adult birds, and they won't shoot all of them, and then the baby birds are left in the nest. Obviously, they're predated then by other animals, and there are diseases associated with that, as in there'll be sort of rotting bodies. It's absolutely horrendous. And then birds from other areas will then come in and start breeding because there's a plentiful food supply because some of the adults have gone. So not only does it not work and it perpetuates disease, but there's been evidence to show now that you can increase flock numbers by doing that because you get birds from other areas coming in. So it's crazy. But of course, pest control companies want that to continue because that pays their wages. So what we're trying to do now is say to the council, right, you've spent £3,000 this month on pest control. Instead of doing that, give us £500 a month and give us a room above like an empty room above a shop in the town centre. There's plenty of empty shops in the UK. We're in a recession. Give us a room above that, and we'll open a window and we will encourage those birds to be fed outside that shop and come in through the window. They will then nest inside that building and we can swap the eggs. So that's how we're looking at doing contraception here. And it's what they do in Germany, and they do that in the Czech Republic as well. And we're working with an incredible lady in the Czech Republic. We're basically following what she's done. And it's her and a group of 6 people. That's all she's got on her team. And she's managed to open 3 pigeon houses out there. And it's made a huge difference. The flock are smaller, they're healthier, the people in the town are happier because the pigeons aren't flying around the food markets anymore. It's a really good compromise. It also means that the pigeons that are going in and out of this building, they can look after their feet because they have terrible problems with their feet. They can be wormed if necessary. They can be given veterinary treatment. So it's winner winner. And it also means that the councils are still doing their job. The people in that town are happy, and less money's being spent. So yeah, it's a really good compromise. So that's what we're working on at the moment. And that's myself and another few other groups, as well as the MPAA. So another few groups in the UK that are clubbing together. We've got something called the Coalition, and we're working together to try and get the councils to listen to us. But I guess when you're working with any form of government, it takes time. It's taken a long time to get there, but we will get there. It's a bit of backwards and forwards at the moment. But the plan is to launch that in every town council in the whole of the UK. That's the plan. We'll get there.
Excellent. If somebody sees an injured pigeon, what should they do? What should they look for? What should they not do?
If they're injured, so basically if you can get close enough to a pigeon to pick them up without them trying to get away, they need help. That's the first thing to say, because all birds and all wildlife will try and get away from a person if they can. So if they're unable to get away, then you know they need help. That's the first thing to say. The second and most important thing is do not give that bird any water or food. And that's for a couple of reasons. The first reason is birds, the way that they breathe, they don't have lungs in the same way that we do. They have a breathing system that goes through the whole body and into their bones as well. And that's what makes them so light. They keep air in their bones and in a special system that goes around their body in little sort of lung sacs, but not in the way that we do. So the way that they regulate their breathing, we sort of automatically breathe in and out, and we fill our lungs full of air, and then we push the air back out. With a pigeon, it's not a movement in the same way. So they need to, it's kind of our brain that makes us suck air in. With them, it's the movement of their body that makes them have the air circulating around. And the way that they then take air in through their windpipe is slightly different to ours as well. So if you put water into my mouth now, my epiglottis is going to close. I'm going to swallow that water rather than breathe it in. But with a bird, it doesn't work like that. They don't have an epiglottis, which is a flap of skin that covers their windpipe. If you put water into a bird's mouth, it's going to go straight down their windpipe, and they're basically going to asphyxiate. And because unlike us, if we get water down our windpipe, because we have lungs that move, we can cough that water up if we're very lucky. A bird doesn't have that ability because they don't have a diaphragm the same as we do, and they don't cough anything back up at all. So they will just drown. So you will absolutely drown a bird if you give them water. The way you hydrate a pigeon is to put a very long tube into the crop, the organ that we were talking about earlier, and that has to be done by somebody who knows what they're doing, by a specialist. So if a bird's injured, that's the first thing people want to do is give food and water. And what I would say about that as well is if you've just run into a window and clacked your head, or unfortunately been hit by a car or something like that, the last thing you're going to be doing is thinking about eating a veggie burger. That is not what you want to do. You're going to want help. So, but it's because people are kind. The first thing they think of doing is water and food, when actually that's the last thing you want to do. So what you want to do is, if you can contain that bird, pop them into a cardboard box, or a bag, a scarf, a jumper, whatever you've got that you can pop that bird into, just so that they're away from any other danger. Make sure they can still breathe. There's plenty of air getting in, but contain them. Don't give them food and water. And the next thing you want to do is just try and find your local rehabilitator. Now, that is a task in itself, especially in the UK. Rehabilitators for pigeons here you will probably have one in most towns, and I know you do the same in the US, but they are hard to find. And again, one of the things that we're trying to do as an organization is bring everybody together so we can get everybody's details. We can help fund those rehabilitators, and in return for the funding, they can take in birds. When people call us, we can give their number out. So that's what you want to be doing, is trying to find somebody. So if you're in the UK, you can definitely ring us, or you can email us, or find us on social media, and we will always try and find somebody in your local area to help. But obviously outside of that, I know you have Palomacy out there, and you've got some incredible pigeon advocates out there as well. And it's the same, as you say, you mentioned Italy. I know loads of people in Europe that are looking after pigeons. We are out there. There are thousands of people looking after them. They are difficult to find. It would be lovely. It would be my absolute dream to have a worldwide network of people. So it doesn't matter where you are in the world, you can dial a number or go on a website and find a pigeon rehabber. That would be absolutely amazing. And again, we will make that happen. I'm determined to make that happen. But yeah, you can't really look after them yourself, unfortunately. They're too specialist.
I hear you. But I also hear that we have a responsibility to care about them. We brought them into our civilization, and so they deserve our compassion.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, we absolutely do.
Before we have to go, I have one more question. Tell us about carrier pigeons.
Oh, so carrier pigeons, well, they're extinct. So carrier pigeons basically were just shot to death. They were
Oh.
used. And then yeah, we just used them for sport and we shot them and they just don't exist anymore. It's really, really sad. And if some people in the UK would shoot all the feral pigeons to death if they could, and they wouldn't exist anymore either. There's definitely we're up against it from that point of view that people just don't want to see them. I always say, and I say this a lot to people, if you're in a train, if you imagine now you're in a big train station anywhere in the world, a train station, and there is a beautiful, beautiful, maybe bright blue, very vocal, big big beak that's unusual, maybe a hummingbird even, something unusual that shouldn't be in a train station, right? You can imagine that. You'd be like, oh, there'd be a crowd of people, they'd all have their phones out, they'd be like, oh, we must help this bird. We must help this bird. She shouldn't be here. She can't eat. She's trapped. There would be an outrage. Oh, we need to do this. It'd be on the news, a magical bird found in train station. That's the situation for pigeons every day. There are hundreds of birds stuck in train stations, being shot, looking for food. They're there because they're looking for food. They get kicked, they get looked over, and really they just get completely ignored because they're pigeons. If that was a hummingbird or a kingfisher in this country, like I said, people would go crazy for that. But because they're a pigeon, this little grey bird, they just get ignored. They're other than. They are seen as other than, not worthy of compassion. And that's what we need to change. That's absolutely what we need to change. It's
So,
happening. I can give you some, I promise you, I can give you some positive to end on. It is happening. In the years I've been looking after pigeons, the the conversation, I'm not saying this is due to me, this is due to thousands of people getting this message out there, and hopefully now with our association as well, will make a difference. But people are changing their opinions on pigeons now. They're actually quite trendy. There's a lot of sort of merchandise with pigeons on and pencil cases and that kind of thing. And I know that sounds really silly, but the more we can make them, almost the more cartoony we can make them, the more people will look at them, see their behavior and recognize that they're worthy of love. And people now are saying pigeons are really cute. I didn't realize that. I didn't realize how cute pigeons were, the way they walk around and the noises that they make. And the more we can sort of train people and children, the more we can train people to look at them and think that, I think the better. The change is coming, and it's coming from all directions. It's coming from an advocacy point of view, with and without veganism. I think about 70% of the people I work with in my association aren't even vegan, but they see the need for the love of these pigeons. And, I also think pigeons are the key to veganism as well, because if they can love and have compassion for that bird, they will extend that to other animals. But yeah, pigeons are trending. So we just need to keep it going, and everyone will love them in the end.
well, let's keep that going. Susan, how can we find you and how can we support you?
Thank you. So there's two different ways. We have a community interest company, and that is what funds. So that's basically like a charity. That's what funds all of our work, and that is called Little Green Pigeon. Little Green Pigeon has a website, which is just the name, littlegreenpigeon.co.uk. You can find that website. You can buy all the merch that we were just talking about. We sell all sorts of things with pigeons on, again, to make them more appealing. And then you can also look for the National Pigeon Advocacy Association. It's a bit of a mouthful, that one, but if you Google National Pigeon, it will come up. Will come up, and you can find all the information on there. Obviously, we're on all the social medias as well, and you can volunteer. We've got volunteers from all across the world that are coming together to help us with writing educational pamphlets, with frameworks for councils. You can get involved no matter what your skill set. You very rightly talked earlier about getting involved and being an advocate, not just hands-on with the animals. We need fundraisers. Desperately, we need fundraisers. We need people going on the website and making donations and buying things, but actually just word of mouth going on, looking at the information that we're giving and going and talking about pigeons. That's one of the really big things you can do to help.
Well, I know I'm going to be checking that out, and I'm sure my listeners are going to do the same. This has been such a fabulous conversation. Thank you, Susan, for what you do for pigeons and for getting the word out there. Let's keep pigeons on trend.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your time.
If you have enjoyed today's conversation, please like and subscribe so that we can create a better life for animals.
Thank you for joining us on the Better Life for Animals podcast. Together, we can create a world where all beings are treated with dignity, respect, and care. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you're listening. It helps us reach more people and spread awareness about the incredible work happening in animal sanctuaries. You can also share this episode with friends and fellow advocates to keep the conversation going. Until next time, keep speaking up, taking action, and making a difference for the animals.